Hello and welcome. Hello. My name is Renee, Renee Murata. Thank you, Chris, for having me here. It's so lovely to be a part of this community. It's such a beautiful community. So I want to really take a moment to thank you for that. And I would really like to also take a moment to acknowledge some of the things that are going on around the world at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of chaos happening, and that can create a lot of emotional and nervous system overload. And so today, actually, as part of our talk, we're going to explore that a little bit and how we can maybe move through that in our leadership, how we can move through that in our lives, and how that we can normalize the fact that we have this and how normalize the conversation around it without naming politics, without talking about things directly. Let's just normalize that we are feeling chaotic, right? And so I just really want to take a moment to let you know that this conversation today isn't really about doing more. It's not about becoming a better at anything actually other than a better version of ourselves. It's about understanding what's been shaping how we lead, and whether that's in a leadership role, whether that's our own business, whether that's in our home lives, it doesn't really matter. It's things around us often shape how we lead without us being even aware of that. So thank you again for being here. It's so nice to be a part of this community. And so let's begin. Okay. First, I'd like to have you take a moment and just put your feet on the floor, uncross your legs, put your feet on the floor. Let's just kind of ground ourselves a little bit and take one slow breath in. Hold it and now release it. Let's do that another time. Hold it. Now release it. And once again, let's do that again. Hold. Okay. So, welcome. Today we're going to talk about becoming a female CEO. And again, we're not talking about a role that's in the corner office somewhere. We're talking about an internal shift where we embody our leadership. And embodiment is really our goal in understanding who we are. Okay? So let's look at some of the old paradigms of leadership first. Right? So the old paradigm, the patriarchal kind of toxic, often toxic, not always, often toxic, productivity over people. You know, that bottom dollar is so important, you know, that people's lives aren't quite as important. Control, making sure that you have control versus building trust, right? Also the logic. So the old patriarchal kind of mentality was logic over intuition, that gut instinct out the window, right? So we're wanting to shift that. And really, the older paradigm of leadership also really encouraged emotional suppression. So I want you to think about it. How many times you in your office were told you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, right? Women, we have emotions. You know, it's just part of life. So rather than recognizing emotions as a strength, people tried to suppress them. Even other women. I've had other women tell me, suppress it, right? Because they had learned to. And so your worth in a company was tied to the output. What did you manage to do throughout the day? Did you get everything done? Did the bottom dollar mentality, right? So that old paradigm of leadership really had an impact on how we learn to lead. There's a new paradigm of leadership, right? That is female CEO leadership. And the this is really about internal authority, internal sovereignty, right? Before that external power. So really stepping into who we are, knowing who we are, before we worry about what's going on out there. Okay. The nervous system regulation, right? The new paradigm of female CEO leadership is really knowing how to regulate our nervous system. And that's part of our leadership skills. So when we know how to regulate our nervous systems, that helps people around us to also regulate theirs and feel safe and build trust, right? And female leadership, and please understand, I'm not talking about men, women. I'm talking about the more fluid kind of leadership. Okay? So I'm using the words male and female. I'm using that language. However, I want you to understand, one of the best bosses I ever had embodied this female leadership kind of style. So that intuition as an embodied intelligence. So he really tapped into, and when we tap into our internal knowing, that really helps us to bring forward our leadership. And boundaries, using boundaries as a source of clarity as opposed to separation. Right? So this new paradigm is really important. It brings a different level of leadership. It brings a different type of leadership, and it brings forward a safe space, which is really important and in today's society critical. So you cannot, I'm going to stress this, I can't stress this enough, you cannot lead your life or your business sustainably if your nervous system is constantly in survival mode. And you've talked about, I'm sure you've seen and heard people talking about nervous system regulation and how, being in survival mode impacts us. The reality is our leadership, if we're leading from a place of survivorship as opposed to embodied leadership, we're heading down a road of burnout. We're heading down a road of disconnection. We're heading down a road of that feeling numb all the time, right? So if you can relate to that, drop a fire or a 100% relate or whatever in the chat, because that's really where things are at. And that's how I started shifting my life around, because I felt numb, right? And I'll share more about that here in a little bit. But the reality is life, business, and intuition are not separate, right? They are all one piece. And when our nervous system is regulated, they meld together quite beautifully, right? And when your nervous system is dysregulated, all of those components are impacted, right? Your life, your business, your intuition, they're all impacted, okay? So if leadership confidence, if leadership embodiment, if leadership in general feels shaky, the question isn't what's wrong with me, what don't I know, what haven't I learned, it's what have I done, what did I have to learn to survive? I'm going to say that again. If your leadership confidence, if your confidence in yourself, in your leadership role, again, at home, at work, owning a business, if it feels shaky, if it doesn't feel like you're grounded, the question isn't what's wrong with me. It's not what do I still need to learn. It's what have I done and what did I learn to survive? Because somewhere in your nervous system, something is impacting you and your leadership. Okay, so we're going to look at that a little bit. Trauma, let's talk about that T word that nobody really likes to talk about, trauma as the invisible leadership lens, right? So this is when Our nervous systems learn to survive. It's because of trauma. And so I cannot stress enough that trauma, it doesn't matter if it's a little t, a big T, trauma is the lens by which we now have learned to lead, right? And it's not just major events. Like I have the litany of things that I could talk about if I went down that path is pretty long, and they're pretty big events. But there's also the little things. How many times were you silenced? How many times were you made to feel that your voice didn't matter? At home, at work, when you were a child, as an adult. How many times were you silenced? How many times were you punished for emotion? Oh, you're just being a baby. You're always so emotional. How many times did you hear those kinds of words? Right? So this is a type of trauma, and we need to understand that that's part of what has set our leadership. How many times were you rewarded for overfunctioning? Okay, so I'm an older child. I'm the oldest child, right? And so I took care of this, that, the other, and I was rewarded for that. So now overcompensating, overproducing, overdoing, overachieving, right? That is something that I learned how to do. And that is a type of trauma that can impact our nervous system and impact the way we lead. Okay? How many times was safety an issue for you? And safety, right? Safety can be in any context that you understand it to be, right? So how many times was safety about being a people pleaser or controlling an event, right? So I personally have been in both arenas where people pleasing created safety for me, or controlling things that I didn't know the outcome also created a place of safety for me. Okay, so these are ways that we have learned and brought things into our leadership. Now, how that shows up in our leadership, how those things show up is over responsibility, people pleasing, hyper independence, like I don't need anyone, right? That conflict avoidance or escalation. So it can go either way. You might avoid somebody or avoid the topic or avoid something that might cause a problem, or you might just go into reaction, right? Or self-doubt, despite the evidence that you are competent. How many of us are more than qualified to do our jobs, and yet we still doubt ourselves? Right? I have a couple of degrees, I have a master's degree, I speak multiple languages, I built a business, and still the self-doubt comes into play, right? That's the nervous system. So as we learn to regulate our nervous systems, we can impact how trauma has shown up in our leadership. We can shift that. We can create a different style of leadership, and that's really what we're here for, right? These are not character flaws. I cannot stress this enough. It's not overcompensating, over responsibility, people pleasing, hyper independence. All of these things are not character flaws. They are adaptive strategies that you have learned. They are adaptive strategies that you have learned, and it's become a pattern in your life. It's become a pattern in your life that now shows up in your leadership, right? They were patterns that you developed to keep yourself safe when you were younger. So here's the thing. Confidence in yourself collapses. It goes away when the survival strategy that you've learned runs your show, right? So if you're in that people pleasing, if you're in the conflict avoidance, right? When those patterns are running the show, those software programs, I'm going to use that, right? When those mental programs are running the show, right? Then our confidence, we lack the confidence. However, when our nervous system feels safe, right? When we've learned how to deprogram or reprogram those patterns into something else, then our confidence stabilizes. It grows. It becomes something different, right? I learned this the hard way, right? I learned this the hard way. This isn't theory. This is my life, right? This is my life. This is I speak from experience and lots of it, right? So let me tell you a little bit about my story and how I came into being in the role that I'm in, right? So I remember it was June 29th, 2009 at 9:37 a.m. Very specific, I know. However, what happened that day is there was a meeting, it was all of the managers, and I was slated to speak, the fourth or fifth person to speak. And I received an email. I held on to the email knowing that I would be speaking up here in a few minutes. And when it came my turn to speak up, I was asked, hey, have you heard about that project? I said, actually, just as we were getting on, I received an email and learned that we lost the project. My boss screamed at me so violently and so vilely that everybody hung up the phone. And I remember just being in total shock and looking at the clock, and it was 9:37 a.m. I literally hadn't been on the phone. I hadn't even been in the office 40 minutes, right? So that phone call that day could have, that verbal attack, it was so violent and so ugly. It didn't stop me. What it did is it provided a moment of clarity. It was like, this is not what I'm meant for. This kind of treatment is not okay. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm going to set up my own business. I'm going to lead in a different way. Now, I've had to learn things along the way, right? And I write about it in my book, Becoming a Female CEO. The reality is that was the moment that everything shifted for me. I went from being the people pleaser, a high level role in a male dominated environment, to now I'm the business owner in a male dominated environment. And now I had to learn how to be in leadership. And I knew I wanted something different. Right? I had no role models. I just had to figure it out. So I talk about that in the book because that's really that was my journey. 20 years of this, right? I knew if I stayed, one of two things would happen. I would go into burnout that quickly, or I would have to harden myself to survive. And that was not who I wanted to be, right? So this is really important to understand. This was not a weakness, right? I didn't want to harden myself. This wasn't a weakness, right? It was not a failure. It was a moment of alignment, right? I became very aligned with, this is how I want to do it. Now I had to learn it. I had to figure it out. And I didn't have the language of nervous system regulation at that point in my life, right? That was not part of my language. So many of us, many people that I work with and have spoken to, they don't really have that single dramatic moment like I did. They just have something that is kind of built up over time. Right? They built up over time. They know that the confidence, the joy, the self-trust is not there. The feeling of numbness in the workplace isn't there, and they're not quite sure why. Right? It's because they're leading from a place of not being in alignment. It's because there's something out of alignment with who they are and where they're supposed to be. Who they are and how they're showing up. And maybe that's you, right? So this is the moment that set me on my path, right? not to just lead differently, but to understand why so many women doubt themselves, why so many women allow themselves to be in this place and this energy and this not understanding of who they are, right? Why was I in a place? Yes, I enjoyed the title that I had. I enjoyed a lot of the people that I worked with, but I did not enjoy this. I had to do it this way. This concept, like I was talking about, the old patriarchal style, didn't fit who I was. So right. So what are some of the things that create that unshakable confidence? Let's talk about it a little bit, right? So unshakable confidence is really about being in alignment. It's about being in alignment, having aligned intentions, understanding who you are, how you want to lead. What kind of leader do you want to be? Are you leading in the way that you envisioned yourself leading? Or is there a slight disconnect? And if there's a disconnect, if you think you are, but something's not flowing for you, and I am going to use that word because I'm in a community that understands that word, right? If things aren't flowing for you, it's because something is out of alignment, right? So you get to ask yourself, who am I choosing to be versus how do I need to perform? What do I need to do in order to be in this role, right? Who am I choosing to be? How am I choosing to lead? How am I showing up as a leader? Aligned intentions, right? Next, right, the second pillar that I would say in creating that unshakable confidence would be boundaries. Now, some people think of boundaries of somebody invading your personal space, and that is, of course, a boundary. There's energetic boundaries, there's time boundaries, there's emotional boundaries, and then there's physical boundaries. Right? This is really understanding your self-leadership. So when you have solid boundaries, understanding that I need these things, I need people to have integrity. I need people to be honest with me. That's some word I don't really like to use. Honesty is important to me. Integrity is important to me. Joy is important to me. And if I feel somebody out of that, or I feel like there's kind of happening in that, then that's a crossing a boundary for me, and that creates some conflict, right? So when there's conflict, it's because somewhere in your life a boundary is being crossed. Maybe somebody's an emotional vampire, right? They're taking so much out of you, so much energy out of you. That's a boundary that's being crossed. You're feeling this resentment building up, right? This is a boundary, right? So creating that safety, that clarity, understanding where your boundaries are, understanding your energetic boundaries, understanding your time boundaries. I need 90 minutes in the morning undisturbed, right? I need that block of time, right? So folks know, my door's closed, it's latched, that means I'm doing something like this, or I'm talking to a client and there's a slight knock. If there's an acknowledgement, they'll pop their head in, if not, they slowly walk away, right? Without boundaries, resentment, burnout, reactivity, all those things come out and they impact your leadership. If you can relate to that, relate in the chat there, because we all have had our boundaries crossed in some way, shape, or form, and maybe you didn't realize a boundary was crossed. Right, so start paying attention to where resentment is starting to build up. Start paying attention to where conflict may be occurring. Start paying attention to things that are draining your energy or where you're feeling reactive. Right? Those are areas where a boundary has been crossed. Third pillar is power language. Right? So this is language that regulates or dysregulates. Dysregulates our system, right? I need you to finish this report. I need the report by 5 o'clock. Versus if we take the task-oriented approach and say the report needs to be finished by 5 o'clock, now instead of impacting their nervous system and our nervous system, because now we've created this power dynamic, right? I need you to, and it allows a blame, shame, dominance kind of energy by shifting it to a task related. The report needs to get done by 5. Now there's clarity and ownership, right? So it shifts things, and it allows more spaciousness, and it allows there to be more trust. It allows there to be more confidence building between you and the people that you're working with. It just is it's a completely different energy entirely. And then finally, the fourth pillar is rewriting your victim narrative. And we all have it. And if you say you don't, I'd really love to talk to you about it, right? I'd really love to know why and how you don't. Those are some of the phrases. I have to is really a powerless kind of language. And it's very much a victim language. I have to get this done. Do you? Right? Versus I choose to or I get to. This restores your agency, your authority, your sovereignty. I choose to do this. It has to be done. And I'm choosing to do it later. Or I'm choosing to do it now. Right? So paying attention to where you might be in a victim energy. Right? So that's your fourth pillar, and really starting to shift your leadership from the old paradigm to the new where things flow, right? Where you're starting to embody it, where you're starting to feel it in your body, where you're coming from a space of knowingness. It's not a hat you're putting on anymore, right? That leadership isn't, I'm a leader now I'm a mom, I'm a leader again. Now I'm, a soccer player. I'm a leader today. Now I have to, go and be the daughter and take care of the older parent. It becomes who you are. Right? It becomes who you are. Right? These are, they're not mindset tools. They're nervous system tools. Right? Regulating that nervous system. So important. These concepts are woven all throughout my book, Becoming a Female CEO. They're also part of what I do in my practice. So, it just becomes something that I do, right? And from there, I have created all kinds of wonderful things. It's been a lot of fun. I'm very excited to be able to share this with everybody and tell you about it, because I believe so strongly in the importance of it. I believe so strongly in the importance of women having regulated, and men having the regulated nervous system, so that we can lead from unshakable confidence, right? It's an opportunity to shift how we show up for ourselves and others, right? It's it's definitely an important aspect of our lives. So I'd like to invite you, if you're interested, to connect and have a conversation around it, share more information with you around unshakable confidence, because I've seen the transitions in people when it moves on. So again, what would change, right? If you trusted yourself more, what would change if you were the star of your own show? What would change if you were the leader of your life, the CEO of your own life? What would happen? How would that feel? Take a moment. How would that feel if you were the CEO of your own life? right? So if you're not there, don't worry. You're not behind. You're not broken, right? Nothing wrong with you. Your system has adapted beautifully to leading in a way that keeps you, it keeps your mind safe, right? Your mind is telling you you're safe. However, if you're feeling any of what I'm saying to you, then your nervous system's out of whack, right? And so let's regulate the nervous system so that you can lead from a place of joy. Becoming a female CEO, again, isn't about proving your power. It's about trusting it. I want to say that again, right? Becoming a female CEO, CEO of your own life, isn't about proving anything. It's not about proving your power. It's about trusting it. Thank you again for having me. Thank you, Chris, for this opportunity. It's such a joy, and I'm very excited to have had the opportunity to share some of what I do with this community and some of what I do with all of you, because it's a beautiful community, and I think we're all very much on this path. And so thank you again, and have a beautiful day. So bye for now.